Good day, dear students. Herewith, we are going to have another lecture on principles of literary criticism. In the previous lecture, we had an introduction for the what does the paper comprise. We studied the objectives. You were introduced to the topics to be covered, and in the later lectures, we had an introduction to literary theory. Now, let's move to literary history and literary criticism. What is literary history? Literary history is the study of the treatment of a particular work. Right? When a work is written and is being published, it occupies a space, an order, a place in the historical timeline. This literary history tries to study the treatment of the particular piece in that history during that time. What was the position of the work? How important was that work? How well was the work received by the people? How well the work was evaluated? Or how great was the work glorified? What value does the work have in that particular historic timeline is what the literary history studies. It studies the reference of that work in that particular time, a particular subject in literature. அந்த ஒரு குறிப்பிட்ட ஒரு ஒர்க்கு அந்த காலத்துல எவ்வளவு முக்கியத்துவம் வாய்ந்ததாக இருந்தது அல்லது எவ்வளவு கிரேட்டா இருந்தது எவ்வளவு ஸ்பெஷலா இருந்தது அப்படின்னு படிக்கிறது தான் லிட்ரரி ஹிஸ்டரி. ஃபார் எக்ஸாம்பிள், when Milton wrote his Paradise Lost, people were not, the publishers were not ready to publish. It was not read by anyone because it was written by a Puritan. It was a poem on religious theme, so it was not regarded as a great work during his period. But when later Edison and Steele brought out a critical essay, an article on Milton's Paradise Lost, it boomed into popularity. Now we place this Paradise Lost in an important seat in the field of literature, right? So we study the literary history. The literary history studies the place of, the value of, the importance of any work in that age or down the age. மில்டன் பப்ளிஷ் பண்ணும்போது அதனுடைய முக்கியத்துவம் என்னவா இருந்தது, லேட்டரா அது எப்படி முக்கியத்துவத்தை கெயின் பண்ணுது அப்படின்னு அந்த ஹிஸ்டாரிக்கல் டைம் லைன்ல ட்ரேஸ் பண்றது தான் லிட்டரரி ஹிஸ்டரி. It reflects the changes in literary theory over decades. Changes in literary theory, changes in outlook, changes in evaluation. For example, when Milton wrote, it was not considered as great. But later, when Edison gave an article, when he gave his evaluation, it is regarded as something great. So the outlook of the literature has been changing. What was one was not considered as important gains importance later. So this historical timeline records its importance, its value down the ages. It is concerned with the changes in the literary norms, literary rules. When I was giving an introduction for the literary theory, I was telling you about the literary theory would always be changing. It's ever changing. What was once considered as important may not be regarded as the same later, may not be considered as great later. That's what here we mean by the changes in the literary norms. That's what I was telling. When Paradise Lost was written, it was condemned. It was de-evaluated, or it was not. It was evaluated with a spectacle of religion. So it was not important. Later, when that Puritan age moved on, passed on, the work started to glow with its own individual, unique literary texture, right? That's what here we mean by the changes in the literary norms. The outlook, the evaluating scale always gets changing. So we study the changes in norms. When in the period of Aristotle and Plato, works were evaluated in terms of the rules and regulations. For example, unity of time, place, and actions were considered during the period of Aristotle and Plato. When Shakespeare came, it was not it was not given that much importance. Shakespeare was appreciated by his audience, right? So the norms would be changing. It also concerns the periodization. Each period has its own unique quality or its own um, special place for certain norms. For example, during the period of Wordsworth, it was a period of romantic literature, right? So romantic thoughts, romantic ideologies were tried to be traced in the works, right? A poem which was written during the period of Wordsworth should have been praised if it only had something about nature or something experimental in its presentation in the language, right? அப்ப the periodization அந்த காலத்துல சில விஷயங்களுக்கு முக்கியத்துவம் கொடுத்திருப்பாங்க. வாட்ஸ்வத்தோட பீரியட்ல அந்த எக்ஸ்பெரிமெண்டேஷனுக்கு இம்பார்ட்டன்ஸ் இருந்தது. Anyone who would have followed the norms given by Aristotle and Plato would be regarded as unimportant during the period of Wordsworth. So we study the periodization. We also study the dominant text. Sometimes we name the age, the literary age, with the names of the works, or sometimes the name of the writers. Some works dominate the age, right? For example, the Canterbury Tales, sometimes the absurd, sometimes the romantic, right? So some ages, some period, a particular period, a block of time would be dominated by a certain text, which is supposed to be the magnum opus of that age, right? Similarly, the history also studies the dominant authors of the age. When we study history of English literature, we name the ages with the writers. For example, age of Chaucer, age of Dryden, age of Tennyson, age of Wordsworth. So the particular author dominates the age. So a literary history studies all these things: the literary norms, the periodization, the dominant text, and the authors of that age. Similarly, the literary history has a chronological account of books and authors. It maintains, it has its own order of a chronological arrangement of a historical arrangement of the books and authors. We study Shakespeare only after the age of Chaucer. Chaucer, Shakespeare, then we have Spencer Sidney, Ben Jonson, then we have Milton, then we have Dryden, right? So this is how the literary history maintains a record, a chronological order of writers and their works. It helps us to have a systematic arrangement and the study of and the evolution and the systematic change of thought, systematic evolution of a genre, systematic evolution, the rise and fall of certain theories or certain outlooks. So literary history helps us to have a trace of all these things. Its purpose is to trace the evolution, the rise and fall, the transformation of literature from time to time. So literary history has a record, maintains a record, which records the transformation of literature. Transformation is change, the change of outlook, right? For example, when Shakespeare was there, kind of sonnet writing was that much important. Shakespeare himself has written 158 sonnets. So sonnet writing doesn't follow or is not carried out after Shakespeare, right? Similarly, we don't find novels during the period of Shakespeare. So the transformation, the change of the taste of the people, uh, uh, the change towards a new kind of experimentation, the change of the taste, the outlook of the people is being recorded chronologically, systemized in this literary history. Then why is it important? Why do we need this literary history? Being the students of literature, is it not enough to study the pieces of literature? Why should we go for this criticism and literary history? Why are they prescribed for us? For example, when you were in the second year, you had two papers: History of English Literature 1 and History of English Literature 2. Why is it important? It helps to trace the intellectual ancestry, the rise and fall of prevalent taste of the world. It helps us understand the ancestry, which gave birth to a certain theory, which from where does this outlook came, For example, romanticism. Romanticism is a byproduct of French Revolution, is a byproduct of romanticism in France and Germany, right? அப்போ ஜெர்மனில இருந்து வந்திருக்குது, அங்கிருந்து வந்திருக்குது. சானட் எங்க இருந்து வந்தது? இட்டலியில இருந்து வந்தது. ஒரு அலிகரி எங்க இருந்து வந்தது? இட்டலியில இருந்து வந்தது. So it helps us trace the intellectual ancestry எங்க இருந்து வந்தது அப்படின்னு தெரிஞ்சுக்கணும். For example, essay came from France. The restoration drama was a byproduct of a restoration. It also helps us to trace the intellectual ancestry, the rise and fall of the taste of the world. மக்களினுடைய விருப்பம், taste. What do they expect? What is being regarded as something great? What was so important of that age? அந்த காலத்துல மக்களுக்கு எது பிடித்திருந்தது? What did they expect? அப்படின்னு மக்களினுடைய taste would be reflected definitely in literature, right? So in order to understand the taste of the people, the quality of literature, we need to go to the history of literature. Literary theories are based on these dominant ideologies or taste of the world. The literary theories are based on these taste, right? When Aristotle and Plato were there, during the period of Aristotle and Plato, works were evaluated in terms of the norms followed in it, right? During the period of Wordsworth, a work is evaluated in terms of its experimental heights, right? What is something new in it? What is so individual in it? அதுல என்ன புதுமை இருக்கு அப்படிங்கறத வச்சு தான் ஒரு work அனலைஸ் பண்ணுவாங்க. இப்போ modern criticism வந்ததுக்கு அப்புறம் we have so many things to cater the taste, right? For example, we can evaluate a work in terms of its a language, the linguistic quality, in terms of its impressionistic value, right? In terms of its moralistic value, in terms of its archetypal value. அப்ப ideologies would be changing. எதை பேஸா வச்சு இது நல்லா இருக்கு, இது நல்லா இல்ல, it is good, it is bad அப்படின்னு ஜட்ஜ் பண்றோம் அப்படிங்கறத literary theory நமக்கு சொல்றது this literary history. So literary theories evolve and change down the ages along with the evolution of literature. The evolution of literature also traces, has in it, the evolution, the rise and fall of certain theories down the ages. எந்த காலத்துல எதுக்கு முக்கியத்துவம் இருந்தது, எந்த காலத்துல எதுக்கு வரவேற்பு இருந்தது அப்படின்னு தெரிஞ்சுக்கிறதுக்கு the literary history would be of great help. It is somewhat like your fashion, right? When I was small, right, when I was a kid, to wear salwar was not considered as a kind of a traditional makeover, right? A traditional dress. But now it has been considered as one of the traditional wears. To wear sari would look so what to say, outdated, right? To wear sari was once regarded as something traditional. Now it has been considered as something outdated, right? So the rise and fall of the taste, the evolution or the emergence, the rise and fall of the literary theories are traced by this literary history. Then the different literary theories dominate different literary periods. ஒரு literary period ஒரு ஏஜ்லயும் ஒரு literary theory dominant இருக்கும். That's what I was telling. During the period of Aristotle and Plato, norms, the rules were dominating. They were the measuring scale of a piece of literature. ஒரு போயமையோ டிராமாவையோ அரிஸ்டாட்டில் சொன்ன நார்ம்ஸை வச்சு மெஷர் பண்ணுவாங்க. இதுல யூனிட்டி ஆஃப் டைம் இருக்கு, பிளேஸ் இருக்கு, ஆக்ஷன் இருக்கு. Even Shakespeare was evaluated in terms of Aristotle and Plato's classical norms, right? During the period of Shakespeare was criticized by his contemporaries. I hope you all remember Lily would call him an upstart crow who has beautified his feathers with our beautified his wings with our feathers. Lily சொல்லுவார், ஷேக்ஸ்பியர் வந்து ஒரு காக்கா மாதிரி, அவன் இவ்வளவு உயரமா பறக்கிறதுக்கு எங்களுடைய சிறகுகள் தான் காரணம் அப்படின்னு. ஏன், why was he criticized? So because he never follows any of the norms. He never follows unity of time, unity of place, or unity of action, whereas the university wits would follow all the unities. So during that period he was condemned by the critics for not following any of the unities, whereas the university wits were praised for following all the rules. So a literary history records the differences or the changes or the rise and fall of the literary theories through which a work is evaluated. This is a small timeline of literary history, right? During the 400 to 500 BC, uh, the dominant literary theory was a kind of classical theory. It was during the period of Plato, Aristotle, Socrates, and Horace. They all had a certain set of norms as their scales to measure the value of a work. They judged a work of art with the help of those norms. Similarly, during the medieval period, we had Augustine, Quintilian, and Geoffrey. These people had a kind of a bit romantic. They had moved from, for example, the object of literature, according to Aristotle, was to teach. To teach, it should have some message to be imparted to the audience. Whereas later, during the period of medieval or this Renaissance period, we could see the objective of literature from being just to teach has changed, or it has also allowed the concept of entertainment. It should teach and delight. Aristotle வந்து teach னு சொல்லுவார். Spencer Sidney என்ன சொல்லுவாங்கன்னா teach and delight னு சொல்லுவாங்க. So the evaluating scale starts changing. So down the ages, when comes the romantic theory, we have Marxism, we have psychoanalysis, we have formalism, then we have Russian formalism. Similarly, the timeline moves on. This timeline, it gets spread out. Initially, we had only one norm, only one scale to evaluate a work of art. Now we have so many scales, so many outlooks. That's what I was telling in literary theory. Literary theory is somewhat like a color glass, where when you look through a particular glass, you would see that colors, something like that. When you put on the glass of archetype, you will be tracing the archetypal value, the archetypal elements in a work. When you put on new historicism or post-colonial spectacle theory, you would be looking for the post-colonial elements in a work of art. So any work could be studied and evaluated in any of these terms. So we have so many scales now. All these scales are recorded, and the dominant scale is being praised, and the dominant scale is being glorified and celebrated in a particular age. That's what has been studied or recorded in literary history. Now coming to literary criticism, the third topic in our first unit: literary theory, literary history, and literary criticism. What is this literary criticism? In the beginning itself, when I was giving you the definition of literary criticism, the paper, I told you these things, right? Literary criticism is a study of, it's a kind of evaluation. It enlightens and interprets a piece of literature for the benefit of the readers, or for the benefit of the audience for whom the work has been published, right? So literary criticism is a study of is an in-depth, a detailed study of a work from the artistic perspective. It is an act to evaluate a work uh, uh, in terms of its uniqueness, in terms of its what to say, the value, theme, message, everything. In all the perspectives, it has been evaluated, it's been studied. It's a kind of விமர்சனம்னு சொல்லுவோம் இல்லையா, the to talk about the uh, to search for the pros and cons. That's what we call as literary criticism. It is a study of evaluation. It enlightens it enlightens um, the readers, it enlightens the audience or the readers regarding the message which the writer has tried to express. ரைட்டர் என்ன சொல்ல நினைச்சிருக்காரு, என்ன சொல்ல வராரு அப்படின்னு நமக்கு நம்ம புரிஞ்சுக்கிறதுக்கு ஹெல்ப் பண்றதுதான் criticism, right? So it helps us understand a work. It interprets a work for the benefit, for the understanding of the reader. It is the art of evaluation, or analyzing a work of art of literature. It's an evaluation. It is an estimation, whether it is, what are the greatness of that work, what is so mean about that work, all right, what is so unique about that work, what is so special about that work அப்படினு அந்த work of art evaluate பண்றது. The very basic way of thinking about literary theory is that these ideas act as different lenses critic use to view, right? அப்ப அந்த literary criticismல என்ன செய்றாங்க, literary theory வச்சுக்கிட்டு தான் அதை evaluate பண்றாங்க. For example, when Pope evaluated Shakespeare, he viewed Shakespeare from a kind of classical point of view, where he condemned Shakespeare for not following any of the rules. So he edited the entire works of Shakespeare, and he had done a very great blunder. Right? Shakespeare உடைய ஸ்டடிக்கு ஒரு மிகப்பெரிய ஹெல்ப் செய்யறதா நினைச்சிட்டு ஷேக்ஸ்பியரை எடிட் பண்ணி ஷேக்ஸ்பியர் படிக்கல, அதனால அவருக்கு ரூல்ஸ் தெரியலன்னு சொல்லிட்டு அவருடைய டிராமாஸ் எல்லாம் எடிட் பண்ணி ஒரு மிகப்பெரிய ஒரு பேரிழப்பை ஏற்படுத்திட்டாரு போப். ரைட்? What actually was, Shakespeare had his own unique talent, feature, or a flavor in his work, which is great in its own. Right? During the age of Pope, we call it a neoclassical age. So everything was seen in terms of classical spectacle. Right? So this literary criticism, or a literary critic, wears a particular literary theory, wears a particular lens, wears a particular spectacle, and evaluates a work of art. Right? Every critic follows a particular norm. Okay, for example, ஒரு மாடர்ன் பெயிண்டிங் இருக்குதுன்னு வச்சுக்கோங்க. ரவி வர்மாவுடைய பெயிண்டிங் இருக்கு, ஒரு மாடர்ன் பெயிண்டிங் இருக்கு. Right? How can we evaluate those two paintings? Right? An abstract painter, although a modern painter will definitely fail to find the greatness in this painting, in a kind of a classical painting, in a kind of a traditional mode of painting. Right? Similarly, a traditional kind of painter would definitely fail to find the speciality or the uniqueness in the modern painting, somewhat like that. Okay, so each theory has its own greatness, so each critic wears a particular theory or looks on a work of art through a particular theory and gives his own estimation. So, the literary theory is that these ideas act as different lenses critic used to view and talk about art, literature, and even culture. So, this is what is literary criticism. Do we really need literary criticism? What is the need of literary criticism? Of course, we need literary theory. Of course, we need literary history. What is the need of this literary criticism? Being the students of literature, is it not enough to study only pieces of literature? Why should we read literary criticism? Yes, we need literary criticism. Why do we need it? We should also know the answer for this. Why? This literary criticism helps us a better interpretation of the text. It helps us understand a text better. ஒரு வர்க்க நல்லபடியா எல்லா ஆங்கிள்ஸ்ல இருந்தும் புரிஞ்சுக்கிட்டாதான் we can have a real estimation of the work. Right? So it helps a better interpretation, a better understanding, a better understanding of the meaning of the text. It helps us compare and contrast this work with other works. Right? It helps to compare and contrast so that we can discriminate good from the bad, so that we can have an awareness of what is good and what is bad. It helps us estimate, it helps us judge a piece of work. It helps us have a commonsensical approach to the work. Commonsensical approach in the sense, why this has been written like this. Some reason would be there, right? ஏதோ ஒரு ரீசன் இருக்கு, ஏன் அப்படி எழுதியிருக்காங்க அப்படின்னு அந்த ரீசனோட நம்ம அப்ரோச் பண்ணும்போது we might understand it. Okay, so all these things are given out, or are used, or used as a tool by a reader or by an audience with the help of this criticism. It helps us have an insight, a kind of penetration through all possible angles. It helps us squeeze out the last drop of meaning of a text. ஒரு டெக்ஸ்டுடைய கடைசி drop of meaning வரைக்கும் all possible meanings, எல்லா ஆங்கிள்ஸ்லயும் இது இப்படி இருக்கலாம், அப்படி இருக்கலாம், அது அப்படி மீன் பண்றாரு, இப்படி மீன் பண்றாருன்னு சொல்லிட்டு it helps us have all the possible meanings of a work. ஒரு ஒர்க்கோட எல்லா ஆங்கிள்ஸ்லயும் அதை அனலைஸ் பண்ணி எல்லா விதமான பாசிபிள் மீனிங்ஸ், அர்த்தங்களையும் நம்ம தெரிஞ்சுக்கிறதுக்கு இந்த கிரிட்டிசிசம் தான் ஹெல்ப் பண்ணுது. இட் ஹோல்ட்ஸ் சம்திங் லைக் அ டார்ச். ஏஜி கார்ட்னர், ஹெலன் கார்ட்னரோட ஒரு ஒர்க் கால்ட் தி ஸ்கெப்டர் அண்ட் அ டார்ச், வேர் Helen Gardner talks about the qualities of a critic, the place of criticism. அதுல சொல்லுவாங்க torch, Criticism is like a torch. Critic is like a torch bearer. Torch அப்படின்னா ஒரு 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 ஒளி விளக்கு, மேபி தீப்பந்தம் மாதிரி, which is guiding our way. இருட்டாக இருக்கிற ஒரு இடத்துல எப்படி ஒரு டார்ச் வழிகாட்டுமோ, அந்த பாதையை சரியா பார்த்து போறதுக்கு ஹெல்ப் பண்ணுமோ, அந்த மாதிரி criticism helps us reach the exact correct valuable meaning of a work of art, to be exact, right? So this criticism holds a torch and helps us get through or reach the real value or understand the real value of a work of art. So literary criticism guides us. We cannot omit criticism. Broadly speaking, the types of criticism, we can broadly classify it into classical and romantic. Classical is highly judicial criticism. Judicial in the sense, a kind of classical criticism would look for the literary norms, the classical rules. The rules irka, in the norms follow பண்ணிருக்காங்கடா அப்படின்னு norms basisல ஒரு work of art evaluate பண்றது தான் classical mode of approach. Romantic mode of approach is to search for the individual talent and the experimental qualities in a work of art. அதுல என்ன அளவுக்கு புதுமை இருக்கு, அதுல என்ன புதுசா இருக்கு, what is the talent of the author, in terms of language, in terms of theme, in terms of presentation, somewhat like that, right? For example, ஒரு a kind of a uh, have you heard of for example, take the romantic critics, right? The romantic writers have their own uniqueness. For example, Coleridge writes about supernatural elements in as if they are very natural. That's what is very unique about Coleridge, right? Whereas Wordsworth presents natural things in a very supernatural way. That's what is the unique feature of Wordsworth. So this is a romantic approach, a romantic type of criticism would search for the individual talent in a writer. What is so special, what is so unique, what is so great, and what is so experimental in this work? And experimental எதுல இருக்கலாம், எதுல வேணாலும் இருக்கலாம். Languageல இருக்கலாம், rhymeல இருக்கலாம், themeல இருக்கலாம், right? Themeல இருக்கலாம், characterizationல இருக்கலாம், presentationல இருக்கலாம், எதுல வேணாலும் இருக்கலாம். So a romantic type of approach looks for um, the uniqueness, the newness in a work of art, which will disregard any types of norms. எந்த விதமான நார்ம்ஸையும், எந்த விதமான ரெப்ரசன்டேஷனையும், எந்த விதமான ஐடியல் எக்ஸாம்பிளையும் வச்சு கம்பேர் பண்ணி ஜட்ஜ் பண்ணாது. எது ரொமான்டிக். ரொமான்டிக்கு எதுவுமே எக்ஸாம்பிளே கிடையாது. யாரையும் எக்ஸாம்பிளாவே எடுத்துக்க மாட்டாங்க. ஒரு மெஷரிங் ஸ்கேலே எடுத்துக்க மாட்டாங்க. இப்படித்தான் இருக்கணும் அப்படின்னு மெஷர் பண்ண மாட்டாங்க. அது எப்படி வேணா இருக்கலாம். அது எப்படி புதுமையா இருக்கு அப்படிங்கறத பொறுத்து தான் அதோட வேல்யூ இருக்கு. வாட் இஸ் நியூ அப்படிங்கறத பொறுத்து தான் அதோட வேல்யூ இருக்கு. நம்ம அந்த மாதிரி அப்ரோச் பண்ணோம்னா we call it a kind of romantic approach. ஒரு நார்ம்ஸ், ரூல்ஸ், இப்படிதான் இருக்கணும்னு ரூல்ஸ் இருக்கு. அப்ப இந்த ரூல்ஸ் இருக்கா இல்லையா அப்படின்னு நம்ம ஒரு ஒர்க் அப்ரோச் பண்ணோம்னா we call it a kind of classical approach. This is what a kind of broad classification of criticism. Apart from this, we have judicial criticism, archetypal, formalistic, moralistic, archetypal, then we have sociological, then we have psychological, and so many, right? We are going to have a look on all those types of criticism and all those theories, of which only 5 have been prescribed for you. We shall discuss all those 5 theories in detail, and we shall have an idea about the other types of criticism or the critical theories also in our later lectures, right? If you have any doubts regarding this lecture, you can post your doubts in the comment box, and I shall try to answer your doubts very soon. I mean, as soon as possible. Thank you.